I often think about the irony of Monday, October 20th. It started, like so many others, with the aroma of expensive coffee and the crisp promise of a 70-hour work week. I was Clara Hayes, 34 years old, and until that afternoon, the senior marketing director at Evergreen and Steel, a firm in Stamford, Connecticut, whose name was synonymous with prestige. I had built a life that, on paper, looked like a magazine cover. The corner office overlooking the harbor, the meticulously restored colonial home in Darien, the German luxury car, and the handsome, ambitious husband. It was the success blueprint laid out for me since childhood by my father, Robert Hayes, and I had followed it to the letter. I was prepping for the quarterly strategy meeting when the calendar invite for a sudden, unexpected meeting with HR popped up, immediate and confidential. My gut tightened, a cold knot forming deep in my stomach, because when Pamela from Human Resources, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes, calls you into a room without your direct supervisor, the meeting is never about a bonus. Victor Shaw, my vice president, who had taken over 18 months prior, was there along with Pamela. Victor avoided my gaze, shuffling a stack of papers. "Clara, have a seat," Pamela instructed, her voice flat, devoid of the practiced warmth she usually deployed for corporate good news. Victor cleared his throat. "We're making some structural changes, effective immediately, due to budget recalibrations and departmental restructuring. Your position has been eliminated." The words hung in the air, heavy and ridiculous. I stared at them, fighting the urge to laugh. Eliminated? I delivered a 15% growth in Q3. I just closed the Argent account, the one everyone said was impossible. Victor finally looked up, his expression a carefully rehearsed mask of regret. "It's not performance-based, Clara. It's a strategic shift. We thank you for your 7 years of dedication." It was a lie, and the ice in the room was thick enough to confirm it. For months, Victor had been subtly undermining my work, interrupting me in meetings and rerouting my key projects. I said nothing about the tech company I secretly owned or the financial cushion I had carefully maintained. The humiliation was total. A security guard named Frank was already standing by the door, ready to escort me out of the building. The drive home was a blur of disbelief and building fury. 7 years of missed holidays, forfeited personal time, and constant stress, all reduced to a cardboard box of desk trinkets. I rehearsed the conversation in my head, imagining my husband, Marcus Thorne, rushing to comfort me, perhaps finally putting his arm around me and saying, "We'll figure this out. We're a team." Marcus, a high-level sales executive, would understand the corporate bloodbath, surely. But when I pulled the German car into our driveway at 11:30 a.m., I saw Marcus's sedan already parked there. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by confusion. He never came home during work hours. "Marcus, I'm home. Something awful happened," I called out, my voice echoing in the too-quiet foyer. I found his briefcase haphazardly tossed by the stairs, another unusual sign. I climbed the oak staircase, my heart pounding with anticipation, not just of telling the bad news, but of finally receiving the unconditional support I desperately craved. The bedroom door was ajar. I pushed it open and stopped, the breath catching in my throat, freezing me midway into the room. Marcus was pulling on a shirt, his hair disheveled, a look of immediate, raw panic flashing across his face. The shower was running in the master bathroom. "Clara, what in God's name are you doing here?" he snapped, his voice high-pitched and frantic. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text message illuminated the screen. A name, Chloe, and a series of 3 heart emojis. Who is Chloe? I asked, the question barely a whisper, the shock of the layoff dissolving into a new, more profound emotional earthquake. His panic instantly curdled into defensive anger. Why are you snooping through my things? And why aren't you at work? I just got fired, I stated, the gravity of the words meaningless now. And you didn't answer my question. The bathroom door opened. A young woman, wrapped in my favorite ivory bathrobe, stood silhouetted against the steam. She was barely 25, blonde, and froze solid when she saw me. "You must be Chloe," I said, and I was genuinely surprised by the cold, steady calm of my own voice. Marcus started, resorting immediately to manipulation. "Clara, this is not what it looks like. Listen to me. It looks exactly like you are having an affair in our bed, in our home. On a Monday morning when you should be closing a deal," I interrupted, stepping closer, my hands beginning to tremble not from sadness, but from a blistering, righteous fury. Chloe quickly gathered her clothes and vanished back into the bathroom. Marcus's face hardened. This wouldn't have happened if you were a real wife instead of a career-obsessed robot. When was the last time you were actually present in this marriage? How long, Marcus? I demanded. 6 months, he admitted, shrugging with a casual cruelty that made my stomach churn. Chloe understands me. She makes me a priority. 6 months of lies, of late-night excuses, of emotional distance. All laid bare. "Get out of my house," I commanded, my voice shaking with the effort of control. He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Your house? I pay half the mortgage. And speaking of money, how are we going to manage now that you're unemployed? Your father isn't going to bail out a failure." The cruel smirk told me everything. He hadn't just been waiting for my career to stumble. He had been hoping for it. Then he did the unforgivable. As he zipped up his suitcase, he stepped toward me, his finger jabbing toward my face. "You psychotic fool. You have nothing without me. Nothing." And then he spat. A glob of warm saliva hit my cheek. "Chloe and I were planning to tell you this weekend anyway," he snarled, pulling the mistress out of the bathroom. "She's moving into my new condo downtown." My phone buzzed, a text from my father. "Come to the house immediately. Your mother and I need to speak with you." Marcus noticed the alert. Perfect timing. Daddy's calling to check on his little girl. Maybe he can fix this mess for you two. He gave one last sneer, then turned and walked out with Chloe, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my 7-year marriage and my 7-hour career. The devastation was absolute, but what was coming next, what awaited me at my parents' suburban mansion, would prove to be the final, most shocking blow. I stood in the wreckage of my bedroom, Marcus's spittle still drying on my cheek, the shattered wedding photo frame reflecting the emptiness of the space. My father's text message felt like a summons, not an invitation, but I knew I had to go. I had to face the judgment that was undoubtedly waiting for me in the wood-paneled study of Robert Hayes. As I drove the 20 minutes to my parents' estate in Greenwich, a wave of despair threatened to drown me. But then something snapped inside. I needed a moment of cold, hard logic, a strategy against the inevitable interrogation. My refuge, I realized, wasn't a person, but a promise made years ago. 3 years prior, my grandfather, Arthur, had passed away. Arthur was the only person in my life who had ever given me unconditional love and quiet encouragement. He wasn't a corporate shark like my father. He was an early tech enthusiast who had believed fiercely in the power of independence. When his estate was settled, I received a surprising inheritance. He hadn't left me cash. but a portfolio of well-performing tech stocks and a letter. I recalled the words now, clear as a chime. Clara, always have your own safety net. Independence is the greatest form of security. Never let your worth be defined by a man, a job, or your father's approval. Taking his advice to heart, I used a substantial portion of that money to buy a beautiful 2-bedroom beach house in the Outer Banks, North Carolina. I made absolutely sure the deed was solely in my name. I used another part to make an early investment in a promising, disruptive software company called Horizon Digital, securing a significant, though quiet, ownership stake. I kept it all secret. Marcus would have found a way to co-opt it, and my father would have judged my risky investment choices. The beach house became my sanctuary, a place I visited under the guise of work retreats. Now, sitting in the car, devastated, I realized I wasn't completely adrift. I had a place to go, a financial secret that Marcus had no claim to, and a burgeoning asset. The collapse was total, but the foundation was still there, thanks to Arthur. The idea of the Outer Banks, the sound of the Atlantic, was suddenly the only thing anchoring me. But first, the final hurdle, my father. My mother, Diana, opened the heavy front door before I could ring the bell. She looked fragile, her eyes wide with a familiar mix of sympathy and fear. "He's in his study, sweetie. Ethan is here, too." My younger brother, Ethan, was always the buffer, the middle ground in our family's emotional war zone. He worked for my father's manufacturing company and navigated the corporate nepotism with careful diplomacy. I found him perched uncomfortably on the leather sofa, while my father, Robert, sat like a granite statue behind his mahogany desk. "Sit down, Clara," Robert instructed, not looking up from a financial ledger. It was the same tone he used when reviewing a mid-level manager's performance. "I prefer to stand, Dad," I replied, summoning a sudden, unexpected backbone. His jaw tightened. "Victor Shaw called me this afternoon. He's an old golf buddy of mine." The revelation was a punch to the gut. The connection I had never known about. Victor was my father's mole. It explained everything. "Victor informed me you were let go from Evergreen and Steel. He cited concerns about your commitment and performance for some time." "That is a complete fabrication," I exclaimed, my voice shaking with indignation. "I was their top director. This was political sabotage. Dad, not performance-based." Robert waved his hand dismissively. "There are always two sides, Clara. The important question is, what is your plan?" No sympathy, no hug, just immediate, relentless pressure. "I just lost my job 6 hours ago, Dad. I don't have a fully formed plan yet." "And that, Clara, is exactly the problem," he replied, standing up to loom over the desk. "You have always lacked foresight. Success requires anticipation of obstacles." My mother entered, placing a tray of coffee silently on the side table, her only form of protest in these encounters. "There's more," I said, deciding to rip off both bandages at once. "Marcus and I are separating. I caught him with another woman today." The study fell silent. Diana gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Ethan looked at the floor. "Well," Robert finally said, his voice hard as steel, "perhaps if you had focused more on your marriage and less on climbing the corporate ladder, this wouldn't have happened." His words hit me like a physical blow, worse than Marcus's spitting. "Are you actually blaming me for Marcus's affair?" I whispered in disbelief. "Life isn't fair, Diana," he snapped before my mother could speak. He turned back to me. "You pushed for that promotion despite his concerns about your hours. Actions have consequences. Men have needs, Clara. When wives become too independent, too career-focused, men seek validation elsewhere. That is a disgusting Neanderthal perspective. I cried. He's been cheating for 6 months with a woman from his office. How is that my fault? It is reality, he countered, completely unmoved. Now you've lost both your job and your marriage in the same day. What does that tell you about your priorities? Marcus also mentioned financial concerns now that you are unemployed. He worried about your spending habits. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. My spending habits? Marcus just emptied our joint account of $65,000 this morning, and he has a serious gambling problem. He leases a new car every 2 years. Nevertheless, Robert continued, cutting me off, you need to consider your financial situation seriously. Your mother and I cannot support poor decisions. I stood up, pushing my chair back sharply. I will figure this out on my own, Dad. How? He challenged. Your industry is small and word travels fast. You have 1 week to secure new employment, something comparable. Otherwise, do not come back to this house with complaints or requests for help. Failures do not belong in this family. The drive away was a blur of tears and cold, crystallizing rage. I had nowhere to go, but I remembered the quiet reassurance of the Outer Banks. I pulled into the nearest anonymous roadside motel, room 214, the cheap decor irrelevant. Before I fully broke down, I picked up the phone and dialed the number of Veronica Stone, the sharp-featured, no-nonsense lawyer who had handled my beach house purchase. Veronica! I choked out, the tears finally coming. I need you to protect my assets and start a divorce proceeding immediately. I also think I have a wrongful termination case to discuss. The collapse was complete, but for the first time, I was acting not for my father's approval or my husband's ego, but for the fierce, desperate independence my grandfather had prepared me for. The Harbor Inn motel room, with its synthetic carpet and fluorescent lights, became my war room. My college roommate, Maya, and my neighbor, Sophia, arrived 20 minutes later, bringing wine, chocolate, and their unwavering presence. For the first time that day, the sheer weight of the betrayal felt manageable, diluted by authentic, non-judgmental empathy. You need a lawyer, Clara. Yesterday, Sophia, who had been through a messy divorce herself, advised grimly, Marcus will try to claim half of everything. He doesn't know about the Outer Banks house or Horizon Digital. I confessed, the secret finally tumbling out. They are solely in my name, purchased with my inheritance. Maya, ever the theatrical one, looked at me, eyes wide. Clara Hayes, you magnificent secret keeper, that is your saving grace right now. It was my investment in Horizon Digital, a small yet aggressive startup focused on cloud-based marketing solutions, had grown exponentially. My initial $75,000 stake was now worth well over $3 million on paper. The beach house, purchased for $550,000, had appreciated significantly in the booming coastal market. I spent the next hour documenting. Marcus had indeed drained the joint account, $65,000 gone, a classic move of asset dissipation. But then, a flicker of hope arrived in my inbox. An email from Sophia, my former assistant, sent hours after my departure. They deleted your server files, but I backed everything up last week. Client contacts, presentations, even the emails where Victor took credit for your work. Call me loyal, perceptive Sophia. She was another quiet asset I had completely underestimated during my obsessive corporate climb. My immediate strategy crystallized. Secure the home, initiate the divorce, and then used Sophia's files to expose the corporate conspiracy. The next morning, I was at Veronica Stone's office in downtown Hartford. Her corner suite, minimalist and powerful, mirrored the confidence I desperately needed to borrow. "Let me get this straight, Clara," Veronica said, her silver hair pulled back in a sharp knot. "In the span of 24 hours, you were terminated, discovered infidelity, and were disowned by your father. And your husband has emptied the joint account. However, he is unaware of the Outer Banks property or Horizon Digital." "That covers it," I confirmed. Veronica smiled, a genuine, sharp expression this time. "Then we are starting from a position of strength. First order of business. File for divorce immediately, citing adultery and financial dissipation of marital assets. North Carolina is a favorable jurisdiction for protecting your separate assets. Second, you're moving to the Outer Banks today. I need physical distance between you and the perpetrators." By the end of the meeting, we had drafted the papers and set the relocation in motion. The beach house wasn't just a physical refuge, it was a tactical advantage. Later that afternoon, I met Sophia halfway. She handed me an external hard drive containing undeniable evidence. Victor Shaw had rerouted all emails from top clients, including David Nichols, our biggest account, to himself, responding to them while deliberately missing key requests or changing established strategies. It was a clear, premeditated act of professional murder. "Victor was systematically isolating you from your clients," Sophia explained. "The IT guy, Harold, has a crush on me. He mentioned the unusual routing protocol, thinking I already knew about it. It was a cold, calculated betrayal, confirming my father's golf buddy had been actively setting me up to fail for months. I now had the ammunition for a wrongful termination case, possibly even a defamation suit. My next step was the professional first strike. I called the board of Horizon Digital. As a significant investor, I had always taken a passive role, letting the founders, Alex and Jordan, run the show. Not anymore. I requested an emergency meeting, flying out to San Francisco the next day. 2 days later, I sat across from them in their sleek office. I laid out my changed circumstances and stated my intention. I need to take a more active role in my investment. "How can we help?" Alex asked, clearly intrigued. "2 things," I stated, all business, pushing the betrayal aside. "First, I'd like to formalize my advisory role as Chief Marketing Advisor, with salary and additional equity. My expertise in traditional corporate marketing is exactly what Horizon needs for its growth phase." They exchanged glances, their intrigue deepening. "We've been looking for that exact leadership, Clara." "Second," I continued, leaning forward, "I believe the current turmoil at Evergreen and Steel presents an acquisition opportunity. I want Horizon Digital to accelerate the next funding round and position itself as a strategic buyer or merger partner for Evergreen." The suggestion landed like a bomb. Evergreen and Steel was old money, a traditional behemoth. Horizon Digital was a hungry upstart. The synergy was terrifyingly brilliant. They agreed. I walked out of that office, not as a failure, but as an architect of disruption. I was not just building my own life. I was preparing to dismantle the empire that had sought to destroy me. The time for hiding was over. The time for the quiet, strategic revenge Arthur had prepared me for had begun. The news broke the following week, exactly as I had intended. The headline in the Wall Street Journal screamed, "Tech upstart Horizon Digital signals interest in legacy firm Evergreen and Steel. Major investor appointed chief marketing advisor." The article quoted me directly. "Clara Hayes, recently departed senior director at Evergreen. discussing the vital synergy between digital innovation and traditional marketing expertise. My phone instantly became a hotbed of curiosity, buzzing with messages from former colleagues, clients, and industry contacts, all astonished by my sudden, powerful reappearance. The reaction at Evergreen was immediate and chaotic. Their stock, initially jumping at the prospect of a high-profile tech acquisition, soon plummeted when internal documents, gleaned from Sophia's drive, mysteriously leaked to industry publications, exposing client dissatisfaction and management turmoil. The $15 million Argent account, my last major win, was suddenly in jeopardy. Victor Shaw called me directly. His voice was strained, the professional polish completely gone, replaced by raw panic. "What the hell are you doing, Clara?" "Exploring business opportunities, Victor," I replied, my voice calm, almost meditative, as I watched the North Carolina sunrise from my deck. "Is there a problem?" "You know exactly what you're doing. The board is in crisis mode because of these leaks and acquisition rumors." "Perhaps," I mused, taking a slow sip of coffee, "they should have considered the implications of dismissing their top-performing director under false pretenses. By the way, how is the Argent account? I heard David Nichols was unhappy with recent campaign directions." His sharp intake of breath was the sound of my victory. The Argent account was sinking. "What do you want?" he asked, finally capitulating. "Nothing from you or Evergreen," I replied honestly. "I have moved on to better opportunities, but I would suggest reviewing those termination documents. My lawyer has some serious concerns about their accuracy and legality." The very next day, Pamela from HR reached out to Veronica. They offered a significantly improved severance package, 6 months of salary, continued benefits, and a carefully worded letter retracting any negative implications about my performance. This offer, Victor's immediate surrender, confirmed Veronica's assessment. They were scared of a lawsuit and the continued exposure of their management failures. Meanwhile, Marcus was quickly discovering that his actions had consequences. The financial dissipation was the first sign. Veronica had successfully frozen our marital assets, blocking his attempts to access the home equity line of credit. His angry voicemails escalated from demanding I be reasonable to begging for conversation, all of which I forwarded to Veronica without ever replying. Marcus, believing I was still the fragile wife he could manipulate, showed up unannounced at the beach house a week later. I answered the door, calm and dressed for work, my consulting work, that is. "All communication needs to go through our respective attorneys, Marcus," I stated, closing the door gently but firmly. Through the window, I watched his face contort with fury as he realized the accommodating woman he had left was gone. When he began pounding on the door, I called the local police, who escorted him from the property with a trespass warning. The thrill of realizing I held all the control was intoxicating. But the most shocking twist came from an unexpected source, Chloe, Marcus's mistress. "I need to tell you something," she said when I reluctantly answered her call. We agreed to meet at a neutral, anonymous diner. Chloe, looking much younger and visibly nervous in the daylight, revealed her own betrayal. "Marcus told me you two were already separated," she began, twisting a napkin in her hands. "He said you had agreed to divorce months ago, but were keeping it quiet for financial reasons. He lied to me, too." "I know that now," I said simply. She slid a worn folder across the table. "He also has a massive gambling problem. These are credit card statements I found in his apartment. He was hiding them from you." The statements were damning. Over $120,000 in cash advances taken at Atlantic City casinos over the past year. Marcus had been financially draining our life for far longer than 6 months. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because he used me, she replied, her voice hardening. And when I confronted him about lying, he became scary, verbally abusive. I filed a police report. She paused, her eyes welling up. And when I left, he started bragging. He mentioned your father had been feeding him information about your work troubles for months. They discussed how to handle you when the inevitable breakdown happened. The air left my lungs. My father, Robert Hayes, wasn't just judging me. He had been conspiring with my husband to undermine my career stability. The shock wasn't just about betrayal. It was about the depth of the controlling nature that ran through my own bloodline. Chloe showed me the text exchanges. My father's betrayal went far beyond a harsh word at the dinner table. It was calculated. It was chilling. I thanked her, took copies of the texts, and passed them all to Veronica with a single, numb text message. FYI, no action needed. The knowledge hurt, but it no longer had power over me. The process of redefining my relationships, especially with my father, had begun, and this evidence only solidified the necessity of the boundaries I was about to enforce. The discovery of my father's conspiracy with Marcus was the final splinter of my old life falling away. It was a searing pain, yes, but it provided an immense clarity. The foundation of my existence, the fatherly approval, the marital partnership, had been built on sand and surveillance. From my beach house sanctuary, I initiated the next phase of the plan, the final, swift resolution of the divorce. Veronica Stone was masterful. With the evidence of Marcus's $120,000 gambling debts, his financial dissipation of the joint account, and his acknowledged adultery, we held all the leverage. Marcus's lawyer, clearly sensing the impending disaster, reached out for an immediate settlement. He's offering to sign away all claims to your separate assets, the house, Horizon Digital, everything, in exchange for a clean break and $80,000 cash to settle some upcoming expenses, Veronica reported to me over video call. He's desperate, Clara. Those debts aren't from banks. The money Marcus wanted was slightly more than the amount he had stolen from the joint account. I smiled, a cold, predatory expression I didn't recognize. Give him $60,000 and the debt forgiveness. Make it clear, no further contact. Signatures by Friday. It was a surprisingly low price for absolute freedom, but Marcus needed liquid cash now. He was cornered, his financial addiction overriding his greed for a larger marital settlement. I signed the papers with a profound sense of relief and an odd, hollow sadness for the 7 years I had wasted. By the end of the week, I was officially divorced, less than 3 months after the collapse. The very next Sunday, my father, Robert Hayes, finally tracked me down. He appeared at my front door on the Outer Banks, looking uncharacteristically small and uncertain beneath the bright, unforgiving North Carolina sun. He was wearing his usual crisp polo shirt, but the tailored confidence seemed to have worn thin. "Your mother is worried about you," he said immediately, unable to admit his own concern. "I'm fine," I replied, keeping the door open only slightly, the fresh sea air a powerful contrast to the stuffy formality of his presence. "I've been busy rebuilding the life that collapsed while you were golfing with Victor Shaw and plotting with Marcus." His eyes widened, the small admission of guilt visible for a fraction of a second. "You know about that." "I know a lot of things now that I didn't know 3 months ago, Dad. Like how my own father actively undermined my career stability and blamed me for the consequences of his complicity." "That is not fair, Clara. I simply had concerns about your work-life balance." I was trying to motivate you. No, you had concerns about losing control, I countered, the calmness in my voice terrifying even to me. You always have. You controlled Mom her entire life, and when I started building my own success, a success you couldn't take credit for, you couldn't handle it. When everything fell apart, you rushed to blame me rather than offer support. I had struck the target. He flinched, the sharp, devastating truth momentarily stripping him of his composure. I only wanted what was best for you, he insisted, falling back on his decades-old refrain. What you thought was best, I corrected. You never asked what I wanted or needed. If you want to be part of my life moving forward, things will be very different. I make my own decisions now. I define my own success, and I do not tolerate disrespect, not even from you. I closed the door gently but firmly, leaving him standing alone on my porch, the sound of the Atlantic waves crashing behind him, washing away the vestiges of his authority. Through the window, I watched him stand there for several minutes, a figure of imposing power suddenly rendered powerless, before he finally turned back to his luxury sedan and drove away. That evening, I received a short text message from my mother, Diana. Your father is silent. I am proud of you more than you know. That single text, the most independent statement I had ever received from her, meant more than any corporate title or expensive house. It was the first crack in the concrete wall of her obedience, a subtle but profound shift in a 40-year dynamic. My stand had not just freed me, it had given her permission to see a different path. My strategic comeback was well underway. With my housing secure, my assets protected, my divorce finalized, and a clear path forward with Horizon Digital, I was no longer in crisis mode. I was in a position of power, ready to focus on the long-term reshaping of my life. 6 weeks after the final decree, the consequences for the old guard became publicly visible. I stood on my deck, the cool November wind whipping off the ocean, drinking my morning coffee as a news alert flashed across my phone. Evergreen and steel stocks plummet amid client exodus and executive shakeup. The article detailed exactly what I had set in motion. Following the leaked reports of client dissatisfaction, 3 major accounts had pulled their business, citing strategic misalignment and loss of trust. The $15 million Argent account, Victor's supposed domain, had been the first to go. The most satisfying part followed. In a stunning development, Vice President of Marketing Victor Shaw and several senior executives have been removed by the board of directors following an internal investigation into client management practices and potential ethical violations. Justice, I realized, was particularly sweet when it arrived not through my direct retaliation, but through the natural consequences of someone else's actions. I hadn't leaked those final client reports, but Sophia, with her quiet loyalty and surprising network within the firm, had simply ensured the truth found its way to the appropriate channels, a final, silent act of vindication. Maya, my friend, called immediately. Did you see the news? Chaos. I'm just reading it now, I replied, suppressing a triumphant laugh. The board brought in auditors, she explained excitedly. They discovered Victor had been falsifying client feedback reports for months, covering his own ineptitude. They also found evidence he had been redirecting your emails and taking credit for your strategies. And Pamela from HR? She resigned yesterday. Apparently, she was warned about potential legal exposure for her role in your termination. The conversation shifted to Maya's own professional situation. The leadership vacuum at Evergreen was enormous. She had been offered a promotion, but she was considering other options. Actually, she ventured cautiously, I was wondering about opportunities at Horizon Digital. Their marketing approach is genuinely fascinating. This was the fourth such inquiry I had received from former colleagues in the past week. I promised to make an introduction, recusing myself from direct involvement, but smiling at the realization the talent was following the integrity. My own consulting business, Hayes Strategic Communications, had launched 2 weeks earlier. My first client, David Nichols, the man behind the Argent account, who was eager to work with me directly now that Victor was gone. My second bedroom was now a dedicated home office, overlooking the crashing waves, a much better view than any Stamford high-rise could offer. Later that morning, I received a final, desperate message from Marcus's attorney. He had made one last, frantic attempt to alter our divorce settlement, claiming he had been under duress. The judge, reviewing the overwhelming evidence of his infidelity, financial deception, and gambling debts, dismissed his petition and finalized the original settlement with prejudice. Marcus had nothing left to take. The call I received the following day, however, was entirely unexpected. It was from Jackson Reynolds, the CEO of Evergreen and Steel, a man I had only seen in the executive dining room. "Clara!" His voice was gravelly with forced humility. "I owe you an apology. The recent investigations have revealed the full extent of the misconduct that led to your departure. I was misled by people I trusted, and I failed to perform due diligence." The call continued with a shocking offer, a position to return to Evergreen and Steel as Chief Marketing Officer, CMO, with a substantial salary increase reporting directly to him. 3 months earlier, this offer would have been the ultimate vindication, the goal my father had preached since I was a child. Now, it felt like a step backward, a return to the cage I had just escaped. My response was polite, professional, and definitive. "Thank you for recognizing the situation, Mr. Reynolds, and for your generous offer. At this time, I am fully committed to my role with Horizon Digital and the growth of Hayes Strategic Communications. I wish Evergreen and Steel success in rebuilding client trust." I hung up, feeling a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It was the ultimate rejection of the false metrics of success that had governed my life. I had defined my own worth, and it was no longer for sale. I had survived the collapse, turned the betrayal into leverage, and now I was ready to focus on the human element that had been damaged the most, my family. The professional victories were gratifying, but the emotional landscape remained complex, particularly concerning my parents. I had drawn a hard line in the sand with my father, Robert, and the unexpected silence that followed was both unsettling and necessary. However, the change in my mother, Diana, was becoming pronounced. She had called me weekly since my firm confrontation with Robert, but her calls were different now. She no longer spoke in veiled platitudes or steered the conversation away from conflict. She asked thoughtful, curious questions about my consulting practice and the view from the beach house. She was establishing a quiet, separate connection. "Your father is beside himself with Victor Shaw's termination," she confided one evening. "He feels foolish that his golf buddy was a fraud, and even more foolish that he believed Marcus over you." "Did he say that, Mom?" I asked, skeptical. "No," she sighed, a small, weary sound. "He said Victor lacked the integrity required for long-term success." Same message, different vocabulary. "But Clara, something is changing here. He's been reading." "Reading?" "Robert Hayes only read industry reports and stock forecasts." "Yes." "After you left, he tried to call you 3 times, and you didn't answer. He was so furious he stomped into his study, and then he just stopped. He's been sitting silently in his chair, not shouting. It's unnerving. I knew my strong boundary had forced him into silence, but silence was not repentance. Yet that silence had created a space for my mother to move. One afternoon, Diana called with an unusual update. I started working part-time. I nearly dropped my phone. "Excuse me? Doing what?" "I'm at the local community library," she said, and I could hear the faint, suppressed excitement in her voice. "Just sorting books? Helping with the cataloging system. It's only 3 mornings a week." "That's wonderful, Mom. How is Dad reacting?" There was a slight pause, then a flash of her newfound courage. "Robert doesn't like it. He said a haze doesn't work for minimum wage. He said it looks undignified." "And what did you say?" I pressed. "I told him," she said, her voice dropping conspiratorially, "that it wasn't up for discussion. I enjoy getting out. I enjoy talking to people who don't spend their entire day talking about EBITDA." I laughed, a warm, genuine sound of pride. This was monumental. My mother, who had lived entirely in her husband's shadow for 40 years, was asserting a small, beautiful piece of independence. My stand had given her permission to reclaim some autonomy, to realize she didn't need his permission to pursue her own quiet joy. My brother, Ethan, had become an unexpected and essential ally. He drove down to the beach house twice, bringing me supplies and, more importantly, a new perspective. "I'm seriously considering leaving Dad's company, Clara," he confessed during his second visit. We were sitting on the deck, watching the winter waves. "Watching you walk away from the Evergreen offer, the CMO job, was more inspiring than anything Dad ever achieved. You chose peace over power. He's never understood that choice." Ethan confessed his own frustrations with our father's controlling management style, detailing how Robert micromanaged every division, stifling any real innovation. "He's trapped, Clara. He can't let go of the control because he has nothing else." My brother's desire for professional independence mirrored my mother's emotional, quiet revolution. They were both responding to the void I had created when I left the family drama. My collapse, ironically, was giving them a chance to live authentically. Then the true shock arrived. Robert called me himself. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, a text appeared. It simply read, "Clara, please, your brother told me you deserve an apology. I need to talk to you about some things." The use of please was unprecedented. His usual language was demand or instruct. I waited another week, letting the silence work its slow, painful magic. Finally, I returned his call. "I'm listening, Dad," I said, keeping my tone neutral. He took a deep, shaky breath. "I was wrong, Clara, about a lot of things. I shouldn't have believed Marcus. I shouldn't have listened to Victor. I should have supported you, not judged you." It wasn't a perfect apology. It still focused on his actions and the facts, not my feelings, but it was progress. It was the first crack in the Robert Hayes armor. "Thank you, Dad," I replied, deciding to be generous with my reaction. "I appreciate you saying that, but I need more than words. I need change. I need boundaries. If you want to see me, you need to understand I am the owner of my life now, not you." My family, the institution that had almost broken me, was slowly, painfully beginning to heal, not through my accommodation, but through my absolute refusal to participate in the old, broken dynamic. The tentative ceasefire with my father, Robert, was short-lived, replaced by a devastating reality check that only nature could deliver. 3 months after my final confrontation, I received a frantic call from Ethan. Clara, Dad had a heart attack. It was minor, thank God, but they admitted him to Stanford Hospital. The news hit me with a chilling clarity. All his years of stress, the relentless pursuit of control, the refusal to acknowledge vulnerability, it had finally taken a physical toll. I immediately booked a flight back to Connecticut. I found him in the CCU, looking frail and utterly defeated. The crisp polo shirt was replaced by a pale blue hospital gown, and the man who commanded boardrooms was now dependent on beeping machines and the quiet attentiveness of nurses. His face was pale, his hands, which had signed millions of dollars worth of contracts, lay trembling on the white sheet. "Clara," he whispered, his voice thin. "Don't talk, Dad. Just rest." His crisis became Diana's liberation. During his recovery, my mother took unprecedented control of household decisions and management. The chaos of his illness was the only thing that allowed her to step into the power vacuum without his immediate resistance. She handled the insurance, scheduled the physical therapy, and managed his business communications, filtering and prioritizing something he never would have allowed. "The doctor said he has to reduce his stress immediately," Diana told me firmly, her eyes conveying a new, steel-like resolve. "That means no more 10-hour workdays, no more shouting at Ethan, and no more micromanaging my life." I watched this subtle, powerful shift in their dynamic with fascination. My mother, now 62, was navigating bureaucracy and making complex decisions with quiet competence. By the time Robert began to regain his physical strength, the emotional landscape of their marriage had permanently changed, and he was too weak to fight it. He tried to object when I canceled his flight to the Shanghai conference. Diana chuckled one afternoon, bringing me coffee during my hospital visit. I told him, "Robert, you have tubes coming out of your chest. We're having a nice, quiet winter in Greenwich." And he actually just sighed. That sigh, I knew, was the sound of a 40-year power dynamic crumbling. This crisis became a time of profound, albeit awkward, reconciliation between Robert and me. During my visits, he had no energy to lecture. He could only listen. "I asked Ethan to take over the factory floor management for a few months," he admitted one day, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. I didn't argue when he said he wanted autonomy. I just agreed. "That's a big step, Dad," I said gently. "When I was on the table, Clara," he continued, turning his head to look at me, his eyes full of regret. I realized I couldn't take my corner office, my stock portfolio, or my title with me. All I could think about was the fear of leaving your mother alone and the regret of how I treated you. I measured success by external achievements rather than character and happiness. In doing so, I nearly lost what matters most. It wasn't a Hollywood apology, but it was honest. It was vulnerable. It was the crack I had been waiting for, born not of words, but of physical fragility. My mother's transformation, however, was still the most inspiring. At 62, she had discovered a capacity for independence she had never exercised. She had found a genuine passion for her library job, started a book club, and even enrolled in an online computer class at the community college. All things my father had previously discouraged as distractions. "I wasted decades trying to make your father happy at the expense of my own needs," she told me over a private lunch a week after he was discharged. "Watching you walk away, watching you rebuild your life on your own terms, Clara, it gave me the courage to examine what I truly want from my remaining years." She had opened her own bank account, learned to file taxes independently, and started expressing opinions that sometimes directly contradicted Robert's. The subtle shift in power was complete. She wasn't asking for permission. She was simply stating facts. Robert's heart attack was not a punishment. It was a profound human wake-up call that forced him to confront the limits of his control. My loss had become his opportunity for self-reflection. My mother's quiet courage, triggered by my own defiance, had paved the way for their relationship to evolve from an authoritarian structure into something resembling a true partnership. The hardest part of my journey, the family rejection, was turning into the most profound and unexpected healing. The spring following my father's heart attack brought not just literal thaw, but a figurative one to the Hayes family dynamic. Robert, though recovering well, remained restricted by his doctor's orders. This forced slowdown became the crucible for his continued evolution. He spent less time in his study and more time in the sunroom, watching the birds, a man of high-stakes finance suddenly fascinated by the mundane beauty of nature. My mother, Diana, blossomed. Her part-time job at the library wasn't just a distraction, it became her community. She spoke enthusiastically about recommending books and organizing local history archives. "The best part, Clara," she confided during one of our weekly calls, "is the check. It's small, but it's mine. I decide how to spend it. I bought myself a new set of gardening tools last week, and Robert didn't even comment. He used to scrutinize every penny." This financial autonomy, however modest, gave her the confidence to tackle larger challenges. She joined a community advocacy group focused on preserving local historical sites. When Robert tried to dismiss it as frivolous activism, Diana simply raised an eyebrow, a gesture that spoke volumes after 40 years of silence. "It's important to the community, Robert, and I find it intellectually stimulating," she stated calmly. "I'm taking the car to the meeting tonight." He merely nodded. The man who once demanded every detail of her schedule now recognized a boundary when he saw one. He was learning to be a spouse, not a dictator. My brother, Ethan, sensing the shift, made his own move. He had spent months watching our father's company struggle without Robert's hypervigilant presence and realized the system was flawed. "I'm resigning, Clara," he announced one morning. "I accepted a position as COO at a competitor firm in Boston. It's a risk, but they value innovation, not control. I told Dad last night." "How did he take it?" I asked, bracing myself. He was disappointed, yes, but he didn't forbid it. He just looked at me and said, "I hope you're making the right decision for you, son." It was the first time he's ever used that phrasing. Ethan's professional separation, ironically, improved their personal relationship. Robert had no choice but to respect his son's independence, recognizing that his controlling approach had driven both his children away. My own reconciliation with Robert was proceeding slowly on my terms. He had visited the beach house twice. The first time, he was awkward, trying to find an authoritative posture that no longer fit. He offered unsolicited advice on my consulting practice. "That's interesting, Dad," I cut in gently. "But I've found that my current strategy of X, Y, and Z has been more successful for my client base. Let's talk about the book Mom is reading." He faltered, then conceded. During his second visit, he actually asked questions about my business and listened to the answers without offering a single piece of unsolicited advice. It was a profound, small miracle. He was adapting to his new role as a guest in my space, rather than an authority figure in his. The most profound element of Diana's revolution, however, was her newfound emotional honesty. "I was so angry at you when you were in college, Clara," she confessed during a deep conversation. "You were so free, so ambitious, and I was terrified that Robert would crush that spirit, just as he had crushed mine. I should have stood up for you." but I couldn't even stand up for myself. "I know, Mom," I said, reaching for her hand. "I've forgiven you. I understand. Your survival mechanism was silence." "My survival was a cage," she corrected, her voice firm. "Watching you break free, watching you define success outside of his approval, showed me that it's never too late to try again." Diana's independence was not a flamboyant declaration. It was a quiet, relentless act of self-reclamation in her 60s. She was finding her voice, her community, and her purpose outside the confines of a marriage defined by another person's needs. She was transforming from the silent observer into the co-creator of her own final chapters, a true beacon of hope and strength for any woman, regardless of age, who has lived under the shadow of a dominating personality. My collapse had, in the most unexpected way, set her free. My life in the Outer Banks was stable, structured, and authentically mine. Hayes Strategic Communications was thriving, securing retainer contracts that offered better compensation and significantly less stress than my corporate life. I had achieved everything my father had ever demanded of me, but on my own terms. The ultimate test of my self-definition arrived in early spring, a final formal offer from Evergreen and Steel. Jackson Reynolds, the CEO, didn't call this time. He sent a massive leather-bound folder detailing the revised compensation package for the Chief Marketing Officer role. It included a 7-figure salary, a substantial stock option package, and a direct reporting line to him. The kind of offer that would make any headhunter salivate. 3 years ago, this would have been the pinnacle. I would have accepted without hesitation, rushed home to show my father the title, and felt the validation wash over me. But now, looking at the crashing waves outside my home office window, the offer felt like a heavy, outdated suit. I drafted my response immediately. It was polite, professional, and firm. "Dear Mr. Reynolds, thank you for extending such a generous offer. It reflects the value I brought to the firm and, more importantly, the value I continue to deliver in the marketplace. However, I must respectfully decline. My commitment to Horizon Digital and the growth of Hayes Strategic Communications is absolute. My current work is driven by my own values of integrity, strategic freedom, and direct client impact. Principles I found lacking in the previous corporate structure. I wish you an Evergreen and Steel success in your continued efforts to rebuild trust and redefine leadership." It was a rejection of the title, the money, and the entire system I had fought so hard to climb. My success was no longer defined by a plaque on a door. This act of turning down the ultimate career validation had an immediate and unexpected impact on my relationship with Robert. I didn't tell him about the offer. Ethan did. "She turned down the CMO job, Dad," Ethan announced during a family dinner. Robert, who was slowly eating his dinner, stopped. He looked at me, a flicker of the old ambition in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by something else. "Ah, you turned down Chief Marketing Officer?" he asked, his voice barely a murmur. "Why?" "Because I'm already the CEO of my own company, Dad," I explained calmly. "I work with the clients I choose, on the projects I find meaningful, and I spend my evenings watching the sunset. Evergreen was offering me a return to a toxic environment with a fancier title. I chose freedom over salary." He stared at me for a long time, not in judgment, but in contemplation. I don't think I understand that, Clara, but I respect it. You built this, all of it, from nothing." His respect was the real win. He had spent his life chasing external success, and here I was, his daughter, rejecting the very thing he idolized, yet maintaining the financial and professional power he valued. He was forced to update his definition of success. The final piece of Marcus's downfall reached me that same week. He had tried one last time to appeal the divorce settlement, but the judge, having seen the documented evidence of his gambling addiction and financial predation, dismissed his petition with extreme prejudice. He was officially out of my life. According to mutual acquaintances, he had moved to Las Vegas, working as a casino host, chasing the next big win. The knowledge brought me no joy, only a distant, profound sadness for the man I had once loved and the demons he couldn't overcome. I had forgiven him, not for his benefit, but for my own peace of mind. Carrying anger only gave him continued power over my emotional state. This spring marked a full circle. I had found vindication in my career by walking away from the ultimate prize, found peace in my heart by forgiving my ex-husband, and found a path forward with my parents by enforcing uncompromising boundaries. The true rebuilding, the emotional and psychological foundation, was complete. The time had come to build a life of genuine connection. With the professional and legal storms calmed, I turned my attention to the empty spaces in my life, the space left by the lack of authentic connection. I had spent so long building a life defined by performance that I had neglected the foundation of self-trust and genuine relationships. My therapist, Dr. Laura, who specialized in healing from emotional narcissism, was instrumental. Success and self-worth are not the same thing, Clara, she reminded me regularly. One can fluctuate while the other remains constant. You must practice self-trust. I implemented practices that supported my well-being: morning meditation overlooking the ocean, strict time boundaries around my work, and dedicated social time with friends who energized me rather than depleted me. I learned to listen to my body's signals of stress, responding with self-care instead of forcing myself to push through. The beach house was now more than a sanctuary. It was a gathering place. I formalized a mentorship program I had quietly been running, using my contacts and experience to create a network of support for women navigating corporate environments or launching their own ventures. We held monthly meetings in my sun-filled living room. The discussions were raw, honest, and powerful, creating a community of women who uplifted one another instead of competing. It felt far more fulfilling than any corporate board meeting I had ever attended. The theme of connection extended to romance, which I approached with extreme caution. I was not looking for a rescue or a replacement. I was looking for a partner. Daniel Reynolds, an ethical investment advisor I had met through my Horizon Digital work, began to enter my life regularly. Our relationship developed slowly, built on clear communication, mutual respect, and a shared appreciation for boundaries. Daniel was successful in his own right, eliminating the competitive dynamic that had poisoned my marriage to Marcus. During one of our early dates, he asked about my past. I told him everything: the betrayal, the firing, the father's rejection, and the inheritance. I left nothing out. He listened intently, not interrupting. When I finished, he didn't offer advice or pity. He just smiled gently. "That's a hell of a story, Clara. It tells me you know exactly who you are, what you value, and what you will not tolerate. That's rare. That's what I find most attractive." Unlike Marcus, Daniel appreciated my professional success. He saw my resilience, not my fragility. We were building a relationship based on two complete, independent people choosing to walk together, rather than two halves trying to complete each other. My biggest breakthrough, however, was with my mother, Diana. She and Robert came to visit, and while Robert was out on the pier, Diana and I walked the beach. "I decided to run for a position on the local library board," she told me, her voice trembling slightly. It's a small position, but it gives me real influence on the community budget. Robert thinks I'm wasting my time. And what do you think? I asked. She stopped and looked out at the ocean. I think I've wasted enough time caring about what Robert thinks. I'm 62, Clara. I'm finally living my third act. I hugged her tightly. Her journey from the silent wife to the active, engaged community leader was the most beautiful transformation of all. She had found her purpose outside the definitions of her marriage and her children, proving that independence and fulfillment are not bound by age. My crisis had, in a strange, profound way, provided the catalyst for her own quiet revolution. We were both reclaiming our worth, not by external titles, but by the strength of our own voices. As the 1-year anniversary of the collapse approached, I felt grounded, anchored by the life I had meticulously reconstructed. I was no longer defined by trauma, but by resilience. 3 months before my 35th birthday celebration, while organizing old papers in the beach house attic, items I had salvaged from the Darien house before Marcus could claim them, I found a box of my grandfather Arthur's old books. Tucked inside a copy of Ralph Waldo Emerson's Self-Reliance, I discovered a second handwritten letter from him. I sat down on the dusty attic floor and opened the fragile paper. Clara, it read, dated years before his passing. The true measure of success is not what you accumulate, but who you become in the process. Choose growth over comfort, authenticity over approval, and freedom over security when necessary. These choices will serve you well in difficult times. I have given you the means to stand alone, because standing alone is the first step to choosing who you stand with. Tears streamed down my face, not of sadness, but of profound gratitude. His wisdom, reaching across time and circumstance, had been the blueprint for my recovery. He had foreseen the difficulty of my upbringing and the nature of the world I would inhabit. He had given me not just financial security, but philosophical guidance when I needed it most. I had visited his grave the following weekend, placing fresh flowers and silently thanking him for the foresight that had truly set me free. My relationship with Robert continued to rebuild, slowly, cautiously on my terms. He was adapting to his new role as a guest in my life, rather than an authority figure. He had visited the beach house twice, and during his last visit, he actually spent an entire afternoon sitting with Diana, not working, but simply enjoying the quiet. "Your mother is busy," he confessed, shaking his head. "She's always at the library or that historical society meeting. I don't know who she is anymore." "She's Diana, Dad," I replied gently. "She's finally becoming the person she wanted to be, now that she has the space to do it." He didn't reply, but his expression was reflective, not critical. The subtle shift in their 40-year power dynamic fascinated me. Diana had taken a part-time job, something he had previously discouraged, and he was too weak to resist the shifting power dynamic. She had opened her own bank account, joined a book club, and reconnected with old friends, all without seeking his approval. Ethan, too, was thriving. His professional separation from our father had ironically improved their personal relationship, removing the complicated, competitive dynamics of working for a controlling parent. He was now running his own division successfully, achieving the kind of organic success Robert had always demanded, but doing so ethically and autonomously. The truth I carried, the knowledge of Robert's conspiracy with Marcus, no longer had the power to destroy me. It was a dark fact I accepted, but it wasn't the focus. The focus was the present, the fact that Robert was genuinely trying to be a better father, a father who could listen, and a husband who was forced to respect his wife's blooming independence. The collapse had not destroyed my family. It had broken the toxic mold and allowed us to reform on a stronger, more authentic foundation. My personal life felt balanced. Daniel and I were moving slowly, building a relationship on mutual admiration and transparency. There was no desperate neediness, only quiet, shared joy. I had developed practices that supported my well-being: morning meditation overlooking the ocean, regular exercise, time boundaries around work, and social connections that energized me. I had learned to listen to my body's signals of stress and respond with self-care, rather than pushing through at all costs. The emotional scars remained, but they were no longer gaping wounds. They were reminders of the strength it took to heal. I was ready for the next chapter. I was ready to celebrate. 1 year after what I now simply call the transformation, I stood in the newly renovated living room of my beach house, surrounded by friends, celebrating my 35th birthday. The physical changes in the space mirrored my personal evolution. Walls that once held generic art now featured vibrant paintings by local artists, and the furniture, chosen for comfort and joy, invited lingering conversation. The large windows stood open to the ocean view, filling the space with the natural light of my new life. Maya raised her glass, the string lights on the deck twinkling around her. "To Clara!" she toasted, her voice ringing with emotion. "To the woman who lost everything and found herself." I smiled, feeling the warmth of true friendship. A year ago, I would have prepared detailed remarks, rehearsed and timed to ensure I didn't take up too much space. Today, I spoke from the heart. "A year ago, I thought I had lost everything," I began. "My career, my marriage, my identity, all gone within 24 hours. What I didn't realize then was that I had been living in a beautiful cage, one partially constructed by others, but maintained by me." The room grew quiet, my friends leaning forward slightly. Losing those external structures forced me to confront the uncomfortable question: who am I when all the labels and roles are stripped away? I explained the answer didn't come easily. It came through therapy, through quiet mornings journaling, and through rebuilding relationships based on authenticity rather than performance. "I have learned that rock bottom can be a foundation," I said, my gaze finding Sophia, who had provided the initial corporate ammunition, and Daniel, who stood quietly by the fireplace. "Everything I have built this year, I built on my own terms, aligned with my values rather than someone else's expectations." I raised my glass in return. To all of you who stood by me, who offered couches and shoulders, and who reminded me of my worth when I forgot it. And to those who are no longer in my life, but taught me powerful lessons about what I will and will not accept. The party continued late into the evening. As conversations flowed, I reflected on the journeys of the people who had mattered most. Marcus's decline was swift and comprehensive. His gambling addiction spiraled, he lost his job, and his reputation ensured no serious firm would hire him. He was a cautionary tale, and the knowledge brought me only a distant sadness. I had truly, fully forgiven him, realizing carrying anger only harmed me. My father, Robert, had continued his profound journey. 3 months after his heart attack, he sent me a final, handwritten letter acknowledging his controlling behavior and expressing genuine regret. I measure success now by how often I listen, and how much time I spend with your mother, he wrote. He had visited the beach house, learning to adapt to his new role as a respectful guest. He and Ethan were rebuilding their relationship, free from the constraints of the employer-employee dynamic. My mother, Diana, was perhaps the most triumphant. At 62, she had opened her own bank account, successfully secured a spot on the library board, and had become a vibrant, active member of her community. She was in a true partnership with Robert, who had no choice but to respect her blooming independence. She had finally achieved the greatest form of security my grandfather had spoken of, the security of self. My life was full. Hayes Strategic Communications was a boutique firm with 5 employees and a prestigious client roster. My advisory role with Horizon Digital had expanded, and the company had acquired key assets from Evergreen and Steel, a strategic move that industry publications called revolutionary. Daniel was a constant, stable presence in my life, and we were building a future based on mutual independence and respect. The transformation was ongoing, a daily choice to live according to my truth rather than others' expectations. But standing here, 1 year after the darkest day of my life, I could honestly say I would not change what happened. Every loss had created space for something more genuine to grow in its place. I walked alone to the edge of my property, the night air carrying a slight chill, the moon casting a silver path across the dark water. The lessons were profound. True security comes from within, not from external sources. Crisis reveals character, both in yourself and in those around you. And the greatest freedom comes from owning your story completely, the painful chapters as well as the triumphant ones. I turned back toward my home, lights glowing warmly against the night sky, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the collapse that had forced me to rebuild on a stronger foundation. Have you ever experienced a moment when losing what you thought you needed actually led to gaining what you truly deserved? What was the moment when you realized your worth was separate from your success? Share your stories of unexpected transformation. Thank you for being part of my journey. Remember, your story is still being written, and every plot twist is an opportunity for a more authentic life.